Hello, everybody. Sorry for the slightly delayed opening here. Sal and I were just catching up a little bit. we were catching up, and the topic tonight is one that with these ancient mysteries that Sal and I have an interest in. There are going to be some where it's going to take a little bit of not necessarily debate, but more about Sal and I, because Sal and I don't want to speak for you, but I'm pretty sure after knowing you for a lot of years, you and I are very objective people. Mm-hmm. Like, we are terminally objective most of the time. And in this particular case, we're about to talk in detail about an area of this lost civilization, ancient mystery theory that some people have debated hotly. And I didn't want to sugarcoat that. In other words, excuse me, as I was stupid and I drank carbonated water right before we started.
I'm stupid. I just burned my tongue on coffee.
I just burnt my tongue.
I know I just made. I was like, this is probably cold by now.
Scuba Pete, thank you for the super chat. He says, ancient alien theorists all agree that Sal and Michael have a killer show on their hands. Love it, guys. Thank you, Scuba, and thanks for being here. Okay. What I was trying to say is, as hard to debate, because Sal and I have talked in the last few episodes about how, you can call one thing a coincidence, but you start calling a number of them coincidences, and it's no longer a coincidence, right? So, Sal, how many coincidences before it's not a coincidence anymore?
The phrase is once is an accident, twice is a coincidence, and three times is a pattern.
Okay, great. There are. Let me just give you the high level first, everyone. We're going to eventually do an episode that goes into more detail about the Giza Plateau and what the alternative theories are about the three great pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, and how all of that is really up for grabs as far as who really built the site, who really mapped the site out, and why it matches the sky at 10,500 BC. And that means lining up with the constellations of Orion. We're going to go into that in a future episode. But the reason that I wanted to start here is because it's a lesser known part of this, what some people call nutter archaeology. It's a lesser known piece of it, but it's no less compelling. So let me just bring up this image here. This is, you know it even if you don't know it, everyone, because if you've seen Mortal Kombat, or you've seen Lara Croft Tomb Raider with Angelina Jolie, then you have seen this, and it is Angkor Wat, the famous temple in Cambodia. Now, according to Graham Hancock and some others in the field, and even traditional archaeologists don't debate this, is that the site itself is much older even than the ancient nature of the temple. In other words, that people have been here on this site for a really, really long time. And the site is aligned to very specific geometrics, very specific distances between certain elements of the site, just like at Stonehenge, just like the Great Pyramid with its dimensions, all of them at precise numbers. So, for example, one of the things that Graham Hancock talks about in his documentary is if you look at Angkor Wat in an aerial view and you look at the ground plan of it, they have these different kind of like perimeters that are in the square. So it's like there's this much of a distance between the river or the moat, I guess you call it, the symbolic moat, and then the first perimeter.
It's a very specific measurement. I believe it's called a cubit.
Cubit, yes.
Cubit. Yeah, and it's unique to there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's I'm sure the equivalent would be like 7.3892 inches or something obscure, but 1 cubit.
Yes.
So it's all
And they talk about how like one measurement from the river to the first perimeter is 72 cubits, and 72 is an important number in precession if you measure in cubit, and it's also an important number in their religion, the native religion that goes back, millennia. And then they said that could be a coincidence until you look at the other distances that are within the river to the second perimeter, and then the river to the third, and all of them are significant numbers, just like the Great Pyramid. So all of this stuff was very carefully mathematically planned out.
Nothing by accident.
Yeah, it's not an accident. But what I want to do here, and Mutron, thank you for the super chat. He says, winding down a busy day with you two fine gentlemen. Much appreciation to you both, and much appreciation to you, sir. What I want to show you here is, because we've talked about, and we're going to touch on it in detail in the future, the Giza site plan at 10,500 BC. What some other archaeologists that Graham Hancock got connected with figured out, and then Graham Hancock talked about it in his book, which this book is called Heaven's Mirror. So if you want to learn more about what we're talking about tonight from an alternative archaeology perspective, definitely check out Graham Hancock's book, Hidden Mirror, or Heaven's Mirror. What they discovered is, just as Giza lines up with the constellation of Orion in 10,500 BC, the temple complexes in Cambodia, of which Angkor Wat is one of the anchor points, one of the main complexes, and then there's others scattered throughout the jungle, it happens to line up with the constellation that we know as Draco. But what makes that weird is it perfectly lines up with Draco at 10,500 BC.
Yep.
Yeah. So again, all that's talk about coincidences is starting to kind of fall away. Sal, what knowledge did you have before you started getting interested in this alternative archaeology? What knowledge did you have of Cambodia prior to that? Do you even remember?
I'm pretty sure that's where Shang Tsung killed Liu Kang's brother.
Right.
That's all I got. I think Raiden hangs out there sometimes.
Yep. The only thing I really knew was that beside it being a good location for filming and an ancient temple that's a wonderful tourist site, the only other thing I knew about Cambodia really was that it was this place that took the brunt of the Vietnam War unfairly.
Yeah, and the Clash like to go on vacation there, I think. It's the Clash. And I knew that the temple in the background of us at the moment was used in Lost. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
But no, beyond that, I mean, I'm sure I could insert more pop culture jokes about Cambodia. To include one from Chappelle, but I won't besmirch his channel with that punchline.
Well, I wanted to illustrate this for people because as this series goes on, I know that we kind of did some high level stuff in the very first episode just to get everybody kind of oriented to what we were talking about. And then in the second episode, talking about Gigantia,
Gigantia.
I'll never be able to pronounce it. And the Osirion, I know I'm kind of baby stepping into some of this, but now I thought you and I could get kind of detailed with everybody about some of this. So I pulled, for those of you watching, if you look at our video description for this particular episode, you will notice that we have, for this one, a bibliography. I have links to every single place where I was doing research and Sal was doing research for this episode. So it's all right there, and you can go look at it and give credit where credit is due to the various writers, authors, and scholars. Graham Hancock's book has a diagram. That diagram is right here. And this diagram on the top shows the actual Draco constellation. And then on the bottom, it shows the Angkor Wat at the very bottom there, anchoring the constellation. And then it shows the pattern of the other temples. Now, some I guess I want to say historians, archaeologists, whatever you want to call them, and just some enthusiasts, they look at this and they say it isn't close enough. In other words, they're saying it's a nice fiction. It would be nice to know it's true, but we don't feel this pattern is close enough to the actual constellation to be credible. And they want to shoot down Graham Hancock's theory. I sit back and I look at this and I go, well, I know that these ancient cultures were very precise and they knew their star maps very well and they knew their mathematics and they knew all that stuff, but you are still trying to recreate something that's billions of light years in the sky, and you're trying to recreate it on the ground. And in this case, you don't even have the benefit of a desert or a sorry, not with Giza. With Giza, it was a delta plane. Mm-hmm. You are trying to do this in the jungle,
right?
Site by site by site. And also there's that, what do they call that? They talk about it with Giza where you're looking at it, you're looking up into the sky and you're standing on some degree of curvature of the earth. So you're looking into the constellations at an angle and all of it. So when I look at this, I go, I think they got this pretty dang close.
It's close enough for jazz.
But I wanted to point that out, that some people believe that this is not close enough.
Right. Well, I would also argue, especially with was that Bayon and other words I can't pronounce that aren't part of the connect the dots there at the bottom. I would also argue that even 2,000 years ago, or I think Angkor Wat, the site Angkor Wat was built in 1150 or something like that AD. But even before that, we don't know what stars were in the sky.
Right.
Like, I know it's nice to think about, like, you know, the cosmos and all that, but the fact remains, you know, I believe I was talking to Khalil about this. If we went back, you know, 10,000 years ago, there could have been very possibly could have been more stars in the sky that have since gone out.
Right. And on top of that too, let's say the stars were never there, but if new religions were building on existing older sacred sites, and then they also got temple fever, kind of like with, you know, Easter Island, ostensibly they could have ended up like with that Bayon temple building extra temples just because they're building temples on, you know, they've already taken up all the sites and now they're building just in fresh sites. I did want to point out we have 2 super chats, and no, you're not losing me to numerology, Mo Green. We're all good. But first I wanted to say hi to Miss Deddy. She's here, shockingly. For those of you that don't know, Miss Deddy will be my actually I'll be her co-host more likely for the Pop House Dance live stream that we're starting this year. I'm gonna get that first episode going soon. So Pop House Dance.
Finally getting that PhD.
Finally getting that PhD. That's right. So it's Miss Deddy. Hello. And then let's see. We have 2 super chats here. Poor Cunt, thank you for the super chat. He says, the man who inspired Hancock's pyramid ideas, Abu Mashar, no, not Ignatius Donnelly, was the 9th century Persian astrologer who invented Hancock's vision of history. Interesting. I will look into that furder.
I feel like he calls various establishments asking for himself just to hear them say his name over the loudspeaker. I love Bart Simpson style.
Yes, I'm sensing that as well. He says Mashar's system used the wrong value for precession, and those that still use his ideas today aren't even aware of it, including authors of Hamlet's Mill and Hancock. Well, maybe so, maybe not. I mean, if the precession is wrong, okay, or the math is off, or whatever you want to call it, that still doesn't account for the immensely old age of things like Göbekli Tepe.
Hey, you got it.
So go ahead, Sal.
You got it right.
Yeah, thank you. I almost got it wrong, but I got it right.
Again, through college.
It's what I'm trying to convey, Pork, is that there are too many bowling pins now at this point for you to be able to knock them all down in one swipe. And there aren't enough answers to account for all this. So this is supposed to be a fun series of live streams where we look into this and ask the questions and just go on thought adventures together about the history of the world. So
Right. I would just see his screen name one more time, and that's okay.
Oh man, Killamagwai, thank you for the super sticker. So one of the temples on this map right here is Phnom. I'm gonna mispronounce this, but it's right above Angkor Wat. It's Phnom Bakeng, and I have a picture of it right here. This is one that Graham Hancock calls out specifically in as another ancient site which a temple was built on that has all manner of very precise architectural layout and mathematics. And then obviously it lends itself to the entire Draco constellation mirror effect. But there's a whole further story to this that goes beyond this particular series of temples. If you look in the links in the video description, there is a link to, if I can figure out how to close this chat over here without breaking everything. Here we go. If you look in the video description, there is a link to Glenn Kreisberg's Serpent of the North, which is a PDF that I went ahead and downloaded. And let me just pull this up real quick because it is kind of fascinating. The Draco correlation that Hancock is referring to is obviously what we just showed, is that the temples in Cambodia mirror Draco, the constellation, from 10,500 BC. If you go and you read this academic thesis from Mr. Kreisberg, you will see that he also has found a Draco correlation on Overlook Mountain. Let's see, it says at the California Quarry. And then he says there are 5 dozen cairns that have been identified on the southeastern slopes of Overlook Mountain. And some of those cairns are specifically built, and those that are built a certain way are in the pattern of Draco. And then he also cites some other areas in North America. Some of those were pointed out in the new Hancock series, Ancient Apocalypse or whatever it was. But there was that snake. There was that hill mound that was like a snake. But I don't know if I don't think that corresponds with the Draco correlation. But here, what he's saying is Overlook Mountain here in the United States is a Draco correlation site, which I thought was pretty fascinating. And then the cairns of Overlook Mountain in Woodstock, New York, so in upstate New York, have that correlation to them, which I find interesting. And then he cites things like there's Boyd County, Kentucky, where there's a stone serpent effigy. There's the Ohio Serpent Mound, which is mentioned in Ancient Apocalypse. There is the Skeleton Mountain site in Calhoun County, Alabama. Alabama. Similar stone structures in Tennessee. And then there's other sites in Georgia. And they all share some of the traits of Overlook Mountain. So
there was something just kind of tangentially related. I found kind of interesting is the use of serpents and snakes in a lot of kind of ancient religions and world religions and all that, like, such as Cambodia, where they have the serpent that lives in, what do they call it, the not the world milk, the cosmic milk, something like that, whatever it translates to. Then Jormungandr in the Norse mythology, the world serpent, like they're all these serpents and they're all pretty well noble and important. Whereas in Western religion, the big one, the snake is evil. because of the Garden of Eden.
Mm.
That's how we had, like, calling someone a snake's not a compliment. Where you would think that enough world religions had positive snake influence that it wouldn't be so bad. And I just found that kind of fascinating.
Well, that's that whole argument that some people try to make that, well, the constellations weren't the constellations prior to like Grecian times or whatever.
Yeah, the Babylonians.
Yeah,
that.
Yeah, and yet cave paintings and everything indicate that no, the constellations have always been noticed by humans.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that changes is what different civilizations have called them, but
Right.
they've always been recognized.
Well, even the Temple of Seti, which has constellations all over it, all 12 of them. In fact, it's like that's it's close where maybe they. I mean, but I'm like, that's kind of cutting it because the amount of time it took to make all of it and all that.
Yeah,
for it to be universally accepted that quickly, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It you know, just like the gentleman a second ago who was saying that the processional math is wrong or something like that. Here's what I would say to something like that, whether you're talking about the constellations and people trying to argue that ancient civilizations didn't recognize them, even though there's literal evidence that they did, or with this processional math. Graham Hancock, as one example, the most high-profile example, when something changes, he addresses it head-on and revises his work. He has a preface to his audiobook for Fingerprints of the Gods, as an example, where he has a whole foreword that's not in the original printing of the book, but it's in the revised printing, where he talks about how this book is now, I think it's 15, 20 years old, something like that. And he's like, and there are things, bits of knowledge that have changed. We have learned more, and we have to incorporate that into our new thinking. I have a real hard time believing that Graham Hancock hasn't looked into processional math debates, errors, whatever you want to call it. I really don't think he wouldn't have covered his bases on that one.
Yeah, the big difference I would say between people like Hancock and ourselves and the I guess the academic elites or the people who hoist themselves up as such is that we're willing to adapt to new information when things like that. It's like, oh, okay, I have to change. They don't budge.
Yep.
They're not willing to budge or concede ground at all because it might dethrone them somehow.
Right. It's the whole thing of we determined, 100 years ago that this is the course of events and nothing's going to shake us from that thesis. Right. And if you do, you're wrong. And that's the whole thing with, one of my biggest examples for speaking out in confidence that Hancock will have already addressed or looked into these processional errors is because in his foreword for Fingerprints of the Gods and in his new show, Ancient Apocalypse, he's already addressed the fact that Fingerprints of the Gods was his initial foray into trying to figure this out. And it predicated itself on like a cosmic event, no, I'm sorry. It predicated itself on one type of catastrophic event. And now he's saying we've learned more about Younger Dryas. And now I'm starting to think that Younger Dryas is really where our study needs to go. And I'm scrapping, in Fingerprints of the Gods, I kept it vague because I wasn't sure what I was looking at, but I was leaning in the wrong direction. But now that so to Sal's point, Graham Hancock, even with his main thesis, has been willing to shift lanes, and not in any kind of like dodge. He's actually going, I have seen the new evidence, I've seen the new data, and I need to now apply it to this whole canvas. Anyway, I'm talking too much, but what do you think of the fact that between, and I have some things to pull up here to read in a second, but there is this extra bit about Angkor Wat and the Cambodian Draco correlation that is significant to both Giza and the Earth itself with these ancient sites. It has to do with, and I've cited it in the video description. It's called Angkor Wat, Giza, Paracas, and the Worldwide Grid. And what this gentleman is talking about here, who wrote this on Star Myths of the World, is that he's talking about the degrees between the degrees between each site. And what he says here is that let's see if I can find it. I always have a hard time finding what I just read. Oh yeah, Heaven's Mirror, Graham Hancock's book, reveals that 108 degrees to the west of Giza lies another mysterious site, Paracas, on the Pacific coast of Peru. 108 is one of the most important and widely used processional numbers in the mythology and traditions of the world. It is, of course, 1.5 times 72. 72 degrees from Giza is Angkor Wat. And the Paracas is it is like a candelabra in the sand in Peru. It's like a giant candelabra looking drawing in the sand that has all kinds of mysterious origins. Nobody knows who made it or how it got made. What do you think about that idea, Sal, that there was this worldwide, they call it a grid, but it's more like all these sites are, they have indicators that match them up to 10,500 BC, even as they match up themselves to what their sky was looking at that time at different sectors of the Earth. Do you think there's any validity to that all of these sites would have been made right around the same time, or I should say established right around the same time for this purpose?
Well, I'm in the camp that believes in, that ancient apocalypse, like something happened.
Right.
And I have to try and put myself in a mindset of what would I do, but what would like the human race do, or you'd have to mark its significance somehow. I'm not sure correlating to stars would be the way to go necessarily. Right. But it's that 2 times is a coincidence, 3 times is a pattern.
Right.
And I'm not sure what they were going for with a star grid on the planet, but
it seems like there's a lot of places that are trying to remind us, or at least alert us to 10,500 BC.
Right.
And maybe it's not an alert so much as they were trying to commemorate it so they didn't forget. And then, of course, time rolled on. Yeah. Joseph, thank you for the super chat. He says, great series, guys. Keep it up. We shall. I did not want to do this particular episode, given what we said at the beginning about some of the debate about this particular Draco correlation, without listening to some of the voices of dissent. So I have, and it's in the video description as well, I have pulled up a blog from Jason Colavito, who is an author and researcher, and he's done a blog, which is linked in the description, where he's looking back at Hancock. What's that?
Something's going to yuck my gums. It's going to hurt my mellow.
Well, I don't know if he's making an argument that's strong enough for everybody to walk away. But what he says here is, he says he was getting tired of aliens, but he thought he'd take a break and do some alternative archaeology and look at Graham Hancock's Draco correlation. He said he remembered at the time that he first read Heaven's Mirror that he didn't think the diagram of the Angkor Wat temples was particularly impressive, and he said it looked like many of the stars of Draco were missing, and Angkor seemed to have temples where there were no stars. So then he pulls up a map here on the page, and he shows that there are, quote, many more temples than there are stars. Well, you and I have already said the sites where the Draco temples are sites that it's been established go back a really long way. They go back from before those constructs were there. And then he says to accept any sort of correlation, we'd need some kind of criteria for distinguishing what Grigsby, which is the guy who discovered the correlation, and Hancock meant by the main pyramid temples. And then he says, why, for example, count Neek Peen Temple, but not nearby Krol Ko Temple, both of which are Buddhist temples built in the reign of Yayavarman VII, and both of which are roughly equal in grandeur. What makes one a main temple and the other not? I keep thinking here that Mr. Colavito, is confusing present structures on the site with when the site itself was established and for what purpose. But maybe that's me trying to, as we say today, simp for Graham Hancock. What do you think about that?
I think what differentiates it from the being a main temple is that one of them is clearly a sock puppet temple for when the main temple is in Facebook jail. No, I guess jokes is all I got tonight. I don't know. It's we'd have to talk to those people who established that. It could very well be maybe the temple, like you said, is a newer temple, or maybe it doesn't see as much. Like, it might be big, maybe it doesn't see as much foot traffic. Maybe in the there's no cultural significance to that one, or I don't know all the sites of Angkor Wat.
Right. He says here, and you know me, Sal, like, even if somebody, like, people think I'm like grumpy and horrible all the time, but I actually have a really good sense of humor. And if somebody disagrees with me without being rude or without being personal, I can laugh at a good joke. Like he says, all of this is a moot point, of course, since no one can demonstrate that the modern constellations or the zodiac were known much before the Greeks. See, he's doing that thing we talked about a second ago. Before the Greeks assembled them from modified Babylonian and Aegean regional spare parts, and certainly not either A, outside the Western world, or B, in 10,500 BCE. And then he says, make your own correlation. I used more temples than Hancock. And then he says, so my Batman correlation must be correct, right? And here's the image from his blog.
He left out Pro and Crow Pro and...
I have to admit, I laughed at that when I saw it, because even though I think there's some flaws in his argument, I did like his sense of humor.
Right.
But yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to. That's kind of why I wanted to bring in the contrarian voice on this particular one, because there's a lot of people pushing back on this relative to the discussion, even on Graham Hancock's own website. Which, if you go on his website, he has a message board for discussion threads. He even allows and encourages other people to produce essays and other content that are alternative in nature on the site, not just his voice. And there are people there who are discussing the Draco correlation, basically trying to poke holes. They're not trolls. They're people who've read his books, and they're looking back and they're going, well, I just don't know if this is actually going to work. I don't know if the Draco correlation works. And for all I know, Mr. Colavito might be somebody on the site. I'm not sure, but there are people like him on the site talking about it. And so that's why I thought it was important tonight to illustrate that, to kind of like bring that to the forefront and say, hey, I think this is compelling, but a lot of people don't. Yeah. I think they're kind of caught up in the whole, well, I guess the way I put it is, they're not taking everything back to the ground. as you and I know from studying Giza and Stonehenge and other things like that, the sites were in activity, proven long before there was ever real structures on these sites. Like they were, what do you call it? Like they were areas that were designated for observation and star watching and worship and all that kind of stuff. And they were marked and mapped out before somebody ever said, let's put a stone there. And build a structure. So maybe some people get blinded to, dare I say, the Indiana Jones-ness of it, where it's like I'm seeing the edifice and I'm not seeing beyond the edifice to the prehistory that precedes the edifice. But maybe I'm just verbally masturbating. I don't know.
Right. Well, it's kind of like I forget what I was watching, something from Graham Hancock today. I cannot remember the name of it. Just something that someone grabbed and uploaded on YouTube, and it just had me thinking, because they were talking about it was Angkor Wat's measurements and all that, and it just for us, you know, like folklore, mythology, all that. It's just that it's mythology. It's fun to read about and all that. For them, it was in their entire life. Like that was their religion, and it was like. It wasn't like today where you can pick and choose. It was, you believe this or we kill you.
Right.
So it's like everyone believed in what that was. So it's a whole different mindset.
Yeah.
So it's like you have to like think how they would have thought when it comes to like looking at temples and like how they were built, how they were planned. Like this is very specific, important stuff. So it wasn't just like, yeah, kind of like, you know, Norse mythology. So I think I'm going to get, you know, 2 ravens and then I'm going to gouge out one of my eyes. That'd be fun. Like there is a freight train of historical precedent for the latest and greatest religions always co-opting the older religions' holy sites, and not even for the purposes of desecration, but for the purposes of trying to seamlessly and as peacefully as possible integrate the old society in with the new way of thinking. It's how Bill Maher says, I think in the movie Religulous, it's a lot easier to put up a sign that says under new management.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And in this case, I think if the past is precedent and the past is prologue, is it not more likely for that to be the case, given that we know humans have been there for God knows how long, and we know when most religions started and stopped. You know, we there are very few religions in the world where we don't know of a time before those religions existed. You know, we kind of know where those religions began.
Yeah, they started with the primitive people and ended when the white people got there.
Right. In most cases, yes.
It's a joke, but it's also mostly true.
Yes, and even in cases where, you know, it was, you know, white people wiping out the religions of other white people, you know, whether it was Norse religion or, you know, the Anglo-Saxon religions, the earth religions, all that kind of stuff. The Celtic
Romans taking 1,000 years to co-opt the Greek religion. It took them long enough, but they got there.
Right. I mean, even Egypt had that problem where they had the whole monotheism versus their normal pantheon, and Akhenaten was the rebel that usurped the throne for his reign, and then they literally mummied him away and tried to gloss over all that.
He was their Oliver Cromwell.
Yes, perfect analogy. So I find it interesting that we have religions all over the world that are no longer with us, but they have these texts that they're not all identical, but they all talk about, you know, there was a disaster, and then we were given knowledge and we were shown how to rebuild our societies, and then those people went away to go teach other people. Like it's like verbatim. It's just like, but every single time that comes up, it comes up in that sequence of events. And it's usually they came from the sea And then they
with a boat that didn't require oars or paddles, and
yeah,
there's usually a serpent involved
yes,
somehow.
yes.
So
Yeah, I'm at a point where I'm having a hard time just dismissing this stuff,
thinking about it, I'm sorry, I'm having an epiphany.
Go for it.
So I mentioned the whole serpent thing and the religions and how Eden, right, a paradise, a safe place, if you will, all things considered. A serpent shows up, and he's a bad guy, right? Does the bad thing. What does he do? Convinces Eve to eat the apple. What does the apple give her?
Knowledge. Right. Yeah. Yeah,
sorry, I just
no. It's and again, you've got the Noah myth borrowing from a lot of that as well, because and even other elements of the Torah are mirroring certain things that are in older texts. So like the Ark of the Covenant itself is one of many arks that you can read about in other civilizations' ancient writings. The ark was an Egyptian thing. Like it was so there's this, so there is this kind of legacy. There's this kind of inherited legacy of our human story. The problem is that the essential parts of it have been lost. And now we're all scrambling to try and save the scraps before they're gone. And as other religions dominate over those over time, and then the next religion dominates over that, and then there's a period of purging and scourging and all that kind of stuff, we lose even more.
Or even we'll cover them at some point. Or even if you have an oil company that wants to come through and just destroys everything, Olmecs.
The Olmecs, yeah. We'll get into the Olmecs at some point for sure. But Steve asked a question. He says, if the temples did correlate with the Draco constellation, what would that mean? What it would mean is that it's another piece of the puzzle that locks into ancient people were fixated on the era around 10,500 BC, and that something happened back then that they did not want to forget, and that it was such a big deal that all over the world, even though these societies did not easily join up with one another at that time, all over the world, all of these people were remembering 10,500 BC on a religious level. They were tying it to the stars. They were trying to remember that cosmic moment. Graham Hancock's theory, of course, is that there was something like the Younger Dryas that happened, likely the Younger Dryas, that wiped out a civilization that was already flourishing. Leveled it, like boom, because the whole global catastrophe was that intense. And then the survivors had to migrate to other places and then kind of restart societies elsewhere. And that would be why there are places all over the world that remember 10,500 BC. Now, Hancock in his Ancient Apocalypse documentary talks a lot about how sites like Göbekli Tepe are not just remembering that moment, but they're trying to send a message forward to us, because Göbekli Tepe was a unique scenario where they buried the entire intentionally buried this entire temple complex, so it would be perfectly preserved for whenever it was found, which it was.
Basically a big ass time capsule.
Yeah, and you could argue, even though we are fairly certain at this point that construction of the pyramids at Giza was built later than the establishment of the site itself, Sphinx notwithstanding, because the Sphinx is very old.
Right.
You could also argue that in some ways, those pyramids are also a way to protect and bury whatever the message is, not to hide it, but to preserve it for future generations to find. The problem we have is we don't know what that thing was. We know there's all these question marks around the world, but we no longer have the answer to the question, which I'm sure they would have documented, but through time, through tragedy, through human hubris, over centuries, we've destroyed it all. So, yeah.
Through evolution of language, through conquering, through, I don't know, they probably had their own set of historians who refused to let things line up.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And Stephen M says, he says it's true. The Great Flood itself is referred to in many ancient manuscripts, not just the Bible. There's this contrarian theory that, oh, well, floods happen all the time, and floods were happening all the time. And so, of course, every ancient society has a flood myth. It's a real easy thing to say that and then go, da, 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 da. The problem is that when you look at the specificity of how each civilization writes its flood story, for the ones that did, because there are certain civilizations, ancient writings that don't have a flood story, but there are more than a good number of them that do. In other words, there's enough of them that have written a flood story to raise your eyebrows. And then when you read those stories, the similarities of the major beats of every one of these myths is very similar. And these are all coming from societies that otherwise did not allegedly know each other.
Right.
So it's the flood event was something that by the time they wrote the Torah, humanity still didn't feel like it was over it. Humanity was still like, nope, we need to get a version of the flood story in here because that really messed us up.
Emotional damage.
Emotional damage. Yeah, it's oh man. There's a link, by the way, Cute Fluff. She says, I saw a documentary on this subject recently, all similar stories. There is a link in the video description to Graham Hancock's 2-hour documentary that he made years ago based on the book we mentioned earlier, Heaven's Mirror. And it's the full documentary that's on YouTube to watch for free. So if you're into that kind of thing, highly recommend watching that. It is like a 2 or 3 night sit down, because apparently that documentary was put together with like 3 VHS tapes. And so somebody put them all together, which I salute their effort to do. But the new Star Wars Follies is on the site. It's whatever the last one was, that's the new one. So it's where it is on the YouTube channel RetroBlasting. The link it's at is youtube.com/gobbledygook. I don't remember all those numbers, but it's right there. So, okay. Marcus says, great discussion today, guys. Antediluvian civilization prior to the flood. So much to say. Yeah, it's one of those. It's one of those. You're gonna see, and there's nothing that Sal and I can do to avoid this. You're gonna start feeling like the record is skipping at times on this series, because things are gonna keep coming back around,
right?
And
it's like it's all connected. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's like poetry. It rhymes. It's like poetry. No, it's
poetry. It rhymes.
It's what Sal just said. It is there is a reason this stuff is repeating, and it's not us repeating it. It's history and writings. Now, Skydra Walker says, I'm pretty sure landslides covered Pepe. Let's see. The thing is that if landslides covered it, which Hancock didn't refer to, but then wouldn't there have been a period of usage followed by in the strata, a period of usage followed by the period of the landslide? Whereas archaeologists who are not Graham Hancock, because real, when I say real, I don't mean to throw shade at Hancock.
Right. The people who actually dig this stuff up.
Yeah. Real archaeologists who are authorized to work at the site, they determined that all of the backfill that was in Göbekli Tepe There is no time delineation there. There is no like period where they found potsherds and people using the site or anything like that. It's like all the fill is consistent. So for your theory to work, it would literally be them cutting the ribbon on their new temple, and then immediately there being a landslide, and them never going back and trying to dig it out again.
I can tell you that's not what happened because I'm not the one that built it. Because only I have that kind of luck.
Well, yeah, and the other thing is, if you had just built a complex like that, and you were able to move and manipulate massive stones like that and get the compass points exact, and you knew how to read the stars and all that kind of stuff, and you were doing it for the purposes of using that site, if a landslide covered it a week later, you have the skills to immediately dig it back out. Like, there's no reason that they wouldn't have. They would not have left a site that complex unused because of some,
right.
You know,
it's not like Pompeii where it was covered in ash and magma.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Pompeii is a great example of, hey, we don't know how long that volcano is going to keep going. Maybe it was a bad idea to live next to it. So we're just going to kind of let that sit for a while.
It's like, really hot.
Yeah. It's so hot. Oh my God. Werewolf by Lunchtime, thank you for the super chat. He says, wouldn't it be boring if we knew our history? On one level, but it might settle a lot of arguments.
Yeah, it would, not to define the word with the word, but it would take the mystique out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it'd be nice to be like, to know for sure 100%, okay, X, Y, Z.
Mm-hmm.
And it would just, it would change a lot of things, that's for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of things. All right, ever since I brought up the Olmecs, it's been on my mind. So that's where I'm at right now, just thinking about all the statues and how they have very distinct and different features, and just people are just like, yeah, it's the Olmecs.
Yep.
Who cares?
And then we have another super chat here from Largo's Lair. Thank you for the super chat. He says, weird, fantastic stuff, gentlemen. Any thoughts on why Egyptologists and other modern archaeologists seem so resistant to investigate these discoveries? You know, Sal and I have talked about this a lot in only the 2 episodes we've done so far, and now this third one. Establishment archaeology, they don't like re-exploring older ground, and that's ironic when you think about it, because they feel like they've established a master timeline that has been given a kind of legal precedent by their forebears. So like all these archaeologists going way back the last century and a half, even though a lot of them were just fortune hunters that literally, you know, grave robbed and ripped the ground up and did all this kind of stuff, that it's weird. Modern archaeologists don't approve at all of the research methods of older archaeologists, but they totally buy into their historical construct theories, which I don't know.
It boggles the mind that they're good with the results, but and a lot of it is politics too. Like some of the areas that need investigated aren't exactly easy to get to at the moment. But it's kind of like it's a loose connection, but I'm going to run with it. It's kind of like aversion shock therapy, where when it was created, all it did was didn't work. But now they're showing that if you do it the right way and in the right amount, it can help with certain things. And so it's like the thought was there and it was good. The practice wasn't. But it's just, I think, God, another loose connection because my brain is smooth like a bowling ball. It's using something I know, like music theory. Like a lot of music we know, especially in the West, is written on the same chord progression because it's proven progression. It works. It's what your ear wants to hear because you've been programmed to hear it that way. It's like you have something that's called a leading tone in music, which is something that resolves into something that it's a leading tone is unpleasant in the key. You're just like, and you're waiting for that drop. You're waiting for that resolution that okay, okay, now the song's over. I heard it. We're done. Right. And it's just because of oh God, what was his name? Brain fart. Began with an R, French composer that kind of created the idea of music theory, I guess, or like wrote it down anyway.
Right. You had to ask me. I can't remember.
I keep it. Rachmaninoff is the only one I can think of, and he's not French. Don't mean to alarm anybody. But and then Rochambeau, and I'm like, no, that was a French admiral in the Revolutionary War, but I'm getting there. But it's kind of like he wrote all of it down. And was like, here we go. This is theory as of the Baroque era, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, here you go. This is music theory, and now it's pretty much what we follow on. When you go into Eastern music and they have microtones and things like that, that's why it sounds a little bit different because the tunings aren't the same, the hertz and the pitches aren't the same, and it's just, I don't know. I think all that is to say, the long way around my ass to get to my elbow, as they like to say at the RetroBlasting headquarters, is they don't want to reinvestigate any of it because then everything they do now is based on that. So if they go backwards, which again, like you pointed out, is kind of weird for historians and archaeologists to not want to go backwards.
Right.
Then they're going to have to stop their research and lose their grants for what they're doing.
Right.
And go investigate something that's already established as this is why are we looking into this? No, you don't get any money.
There's too many doctorate theses that got them their degrees that they don't want to then be rendered null and void.
Right.
and kicked out of the publication circuit because all those PhDs have to publish on a regular basis. Skydra Walker says it might have been the flood that caused the landslides, but I'm quite sure Tepe is much older than carbon dating can tell us because we cannot date stone. Yeah, and that's the salient point, Skydra Walker. And let me quote somebody who said it better than me on, of all places, Reddit. He says, I don't think it matters. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. Wow. How did I say that? I don't think it matters. It's irrelevant if it was buried intentionally or by a landslide. The relevant thing about this occurrence is that it was possible to reliably date Göbekli Tepe, something which can't be done for sites that were never abandoned and got reused by people throughout the centuries. And that is the real salient point of it, is that regardless of how or regardless of why it was buried. And that means that we know, because all that strata of soil is consistent from the foundation to the top of the site, we know exactly how old that site is. And that site is, it's something like 12,000 years old. And that means that it blows away traditional Egyptology theory about the origins of agrarian societies,
right.
The development of
all we had were stone tools and we were hunter-gatherers back then. Haven't you heard?
Right. Oh, but apparently we're not. Yeah. And that's the importance of being able to date that site as they have.
The composer I was thinking of was Jean-Philippe Rameau, by the way. I had to look it up because it was driving me nuts.
Jean-Philippe Rameau?
Yep. Rameau.
Right.
He replaced Jean-Baptiste Joulet as the French composer for the aristocracy and all them.
Right.
When we have him to thank for the modern conducting baton. Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, Joulet wasn't the guy that was in Amadeus, was he, that was competing with Mozart?
I don't believe so. Jean-Baptiste, his biggest claim to fame is that we have him to thank for the modern conducting baton, because before then they had a giant stick they'd bang on the ground and he crushed his foot with it and died of gangrene.
Oh, man.
So
I do know the stick you're talking about, but geez, what an unfortunate way to go. Like, I was just I had one job. Oh, man. The new Star Wars Follies is the one you were talking about in the 100,000 subscribers video. Oh, well, that's coming. It's on its way. You gotta give me time to get it done. Those things take time. Let's see.
You can have a Hot Pocket or you can have a steak.
Right. Hot Pockets. I saw another comment here. I'm just trying to find it. The thing jumped on me. Thank you, Skydra Walker. Appreciate you saying that. Mutron says, I'm sure there's at least one preserved body from Pompeii in an I told you so pose. And then
it's not the bodies at Pompeii that make me sad. It's the dogs.
Let's see. Yes, I was thinking of Salieri. Thank you, Steve Conwell. I was thinking of Salieri. Thank you. Well, shockingly enough, we have already spoken on this topic for an hour, and at present, I don't think there's anywhere else for us to go with it right now until we start making more connections with other stuff in the future. So,
Right.
is there anything else that you wanted to bring up tonight that we haven't touched on yet?
In regards to Cambodia, not particularly. I just want people to realize that while there are the obvious elephants in the room,
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's the wrong phrase, but
You mean like Pol Pot? Yeah.
right. The killing fields.
Right.
No, I mean the I shouldn't say elephant, but the more obvious topics like Atlantis and Egypt and all those, like, those are the more obvious things. What we're doing right now is kind of like a ancient structure, laying the groundwork.
Yep.
We're getting all of the extra bits, so when we talk about these major things, we can talk about them and tangentially mention like this and this other one that we've already talked about, so that way we don't have to segue and spend 30 minutes on something that's not that topic.
Yeah, because by that point, our works cited, our references in the video description will be like this long.
Right.
Yeah. I highly encourage everybody who's interested in this to not only, obviously read things like Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock and John Anthony West, but also check out the links and blogs in the video description here. You're gonna read some people that don't believe this stuff in those links. You're gonna read people that they don't feel like everything lines up, and I think that's important to keep a person grounded, because the only way that alternative archaeology maintains a foothold is when you have level-headed people like Graham Hancock being the mouthpiece, rather than some aliens crazy person guy who believes in lizard people and stuff. Those are the people that take our credibility away.
Which I feel like people like him are put there on purpose for that very reason. They're put up on those pedestals to be like, oh, see, this guy's crazy, right?
Right.
Like them.
Yeah. It's really, I think, really important to politely debate the establishment. And unfortunately, as Sal and I have seen in video footage that Hancock and others have shown, a lot of members of the establishment are outright hostile. They refuse to treat these people like fellow intellects. They refuse to even have an exploratory conversation. So one of the best ways to combat that, or put yourself in a better position against that, so that the ideas don't get cast off the table so easily, is to be the voice of reason in the room, is to be the sane person saying, look, we really are just asking questions. We really are just trying to get to the bottom of some unknowns. We're not trying to destroy anyone's career. We're not trying to destroy anyone's livelihood. What we're trying to do is ask you guys who have the keys to the kingdom, can you unlock some doors for us and help us get to the bottom of this?
Right.
Gentle pressure, like on a dam, you know? So
I would also recommend The Lost City of Zed.
Mm-hmm.
That is on Netflix, or I'm sorry, that is on Amazon. If you have that, it's very good. I'd also recommend Atlantis: The Lost Empire.
Yes, absolutely. There are fun ideas like that are peppered into a lot of those movies. So, like, even though in a traditional Dean Devlin, Roland Emmerich way, Stargate becomes sci-fi schlock, the first 20 minutes of that movie is so good. Like with David Spader trying to figure out the Stargate and looking through the the hieroglyphs and all that kind of stuff, and them talking about ancient Egypt and everything like that, and all of that part of it is worth owning the movie. I mean, I turn it off after they actually activate the Stargate half the time. It's not that the rest of the movie isn't fun, but it's just what I'm interested in and I'm compelled by is that first part. And similarly with the Atlantis, the Lost Empire. Thankfully, the last 2/3 of the film aren't so ridiculous like Stargate, but that first part is still just as compelling. Right. Where you've got the one guy that nobody will listen to and nobody will give him a grant and nobody will fund his research and all that kind of stuff.
They keep moving his meeting. Then since he was late to the meeting that moved, they cancel it.
Right. Yeah. It's I just think it's a really compelling set of question marks, and I can't not pick at it. I keep wanting to pick at it. So I'd like to think that life is more. I'd like to think that the reason life isn't as wondrous as we would like it to be is because nobody wants us looking in those directions. And it's not a conspiracy. It's just human nature. Right. I don't believe in conspiracies. I believe in human nature of it's not really important and it doesn't really involve our mortgage and our daily life. So just forget about that crap and let's just keep doing the daily grind. And it's like, but we need more than that. We need more than the daily grind. And
that's one other thing I would add. I've been kind of thinking about for like antediluvian societies and advanced civilizations and things. I think where a lot of people get hung up on, they're like, oh, if they were so advanced, there'd be something left and all. I'm like, well, when these things were written down,
right,
advanced for them was ancient to us. So I'm not saying we're not saying that there was some antediluvian society where they had Macintosh computers and Tesla cars and all that, or because then there would still be satellites in the air if that were the case, unless they all crashed into Earth and caused massive tsunamis everywhere.
When we're talking about an antediluvian society that had advanced technology, we're talking about things that involved organic material that we can't replicate today. So like the cutting and moving of massive stone blocks, and which they address in the Disney film. Actually, they address that in their own way as to how they can move large masses of matter. Those are the kind of things. It doesn't mean that their cities or their world looked anything like our modern world. We're all about synthetics and we're all about chemicals and we're all about plastics and polymers and all this kind of stuff.
Which only happened because of the shortages in World War II.
Right. Exactly.
Otherwise, we'd still be using Bakelite,
which is a much better material overall. Probably wouldn't be as good for action figures, but if we were still in a Bakelite society, I bet you we'd have other things to do. But yeah, like that's kind of where Sal and I are coming from on this. And that somebody was saying here, Daniel says the first 20 minutes of Crystal Skull was okay too. And then he laughs. First of all, I agree with you, Daniel, that the Crystal Skull movie's garbage. But the sad part is it's not so much the first 20 minutes the first 20 minutes, as we know, is a big stinkorama with the whole nuclear bomb and everything like that. But as they explore the nature of the quest more, Crystal Skull notwithstanding, because there's a lot about, we've kind of debunked the whole Crystal Skull thing at this point in society, but not the Crystal Skull thing itself, but where they were headed with being in Peru, looking at the origins of Mayan civilization and things like that, and going back to things like Uga tribe, which is a fictionalized version of a pre-Mayan idea, and then trying to ask ourselves, what is the connection here? What is it that the conquistadors found and then realized they couldn't let out into the world, or didn't feel like they could? And as sloppy as the script was, and boy it was, there was this second act bit that for a brief moment I was like, oh, if they just go left, they're going to save this movie and it's going to be great. And they went right. And and I'm not speaking in political terms, I'm metaphorically talking about a fork in the road. When they went the other way and went hard on aliens and all that stuff, it was DOA. It was like the movie was already on shaky ground. And then it almost reestablished itself in the earthwork graves. And I thought, ooh, something here might actually work. And then it was like, nope, we blew it, which was too bad, because they were almost at this. I would say they were almost at a Graham Hancock quality plot, and then they just lost it, like face planted all over the place.
Went full History Channel on it.
Yeah, exactly. Martin Hughes says Hancock's Wikipedia page, the first line calls him a pseudoscientist. The establishment doesn't like the norm being challenged. Are they hiding something? Again, I don't necessarily believe in conspiracies. I believe in human nature, which is we don't like things that are different, and we don't like things we don't understand. And nothing's more petty than people in a workplace trying to protect their job. So, how many?
I would say we're the same way in like the music industry, but no one likes Yoko Ono.
Yeah, there are some new ideas that are universally terrible. That is true. Cute Fluff says the people in power don't want us to ask the questions, instead accept everything they say as facts. Well, yeah, and again, not conspiratorially, but sometimes it's just easier that way. If you don't think about it, then I don't have to think about it, and I don't have time to think about it, and I don't want to think about it because I got 20 other priorities over here that people are turning the screws on me for. So if you could just go over there and forget you asked, I'd really appreciate it. And that's where we end up. Daniel says,
that with me as a kid.
Daniel says, "Holy shit, cool flask, Sal."
Oh, my coffee mug.
Nice. Every time I see that flask, all I hear is dun 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 dun. Anyway, before I get demonetized, you guys believe the large matter was moved by levitation? I have no idea how it was done. I just know that that's one of the things they can't deny, is because we can see it with our own eyes because it's still there. They did it. They moved it, and they moved all that stuff precisely and so efficiently that around the world they were able to build scores of cities like this.
He's hung up on the fact that that's how they do it in the cartoon. And we're just saying it's just how they do it in the cartoon.
No, like, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not saying that's how it was done in real life. What I'm saying is the Atlantis cartoon, in its own fantastical way, still addressed the issue off to the side. You know, let's not be pedantic here. We're all supposed to be thinking outside of, that's why my mouth gets me in trouble.
Oh, at least your name's pronounceable. Doesn't sound like some computer generated password.
Yeah, exactly, Sam Newsman. I'm the same way. I once someone starts talking about aliens or lizard people, I'm out. No, I do believe humans were able to achieve this. I do believe humans were able to accomplish what we see with our own eyes. It's just more about how did they do it? What are the gaps in our history, and why are we afraid to address those gaps? And why are we afraid
to the aliens?
Yeah. To me, it's almost as if we're living in a kind of world where everybody has the fear that Doc Brown has in Back to the Future Part 2, where it's like, if we change something in the timeline, we could wipe out our own existence. Except instead of existence, it's like, if we change something in the timeline, we could wipe out our own achievements. We could wipe out our own motivation for being. Because we learned that, all this other stuff happened first. And it's like, I just want to look at all those people and go, who cares? What?
That's not how time works. You just create a paradox, because if you change something in the past, that prevents you from going back to the past and you never went to begin with, and then you don't change the thing in the past because you never went to begin with, it creates a paradox.
Right.
So anything that you go back in time and do, you've already done, because you've already gone back in time to do it. That led you to going back in time to do it in the first place. So you're free to do whatever you want to do. So,
the rabbit holes we're gonna go down in this series, Sal. I can't wait for the clip compilations that are gonna come out from all the various episodes where we're just having these discussions.
It's gonna be good.
It's going to be great. All right. Well, I know that was a little bit of a shorter one, but it is a more focused discussion about this Draco correlation. I know we kind of hit some highlights. We will be going into a little bit more about the North America stuff in the future, in a future episode. That's why I kind of just bounced over it on this one, because this North America thesis that this guy wrote was just about things related to the Draco correlation. Not all of the sites that need to be discussed in North America have a Draco constellation connection. Some of them are built for totally different purposes. So this will be revisited in the future.
And we have a lot of sites in North America that don't get talked about or acknowledged. And I have theories about that. And it's going to rustle feathers.
Okay. About the North American sites? Okay. Well, you're not going to rustle my feather. You're not going to rustle my feather. You're not going to ruffle my feathers.
No, I said Russell. That's on me. I just glossed right on past it.
Oh, did you say Russell?
Oh yeah.
Oh, I thought I was the one making that mistake.
That was me.
Okay. We both said it. I'm not going to Kurt Russell your feathers here, but I just want to. All right. Well, everybody, this was a short one, but again, needed to be a little shorter. The next one will be longer. We will be announcing it with a thumbnail when we decide what we're going to talk about. Sal, do you feel like we should do another sort of puzzle piece? In other words, sort of set the stage for eventually talking about Giza and all that kind of stuff? Because I feel like that's our end game.
Yeah. Say Giza, Atlantis are they're big ones that'll go well over 90 minutes probably.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say another puzzle piece. I think these little bite-sized ones are good.
So like an Easter Island, or maybe a Stonehenge, or the stone circles of England, or
well, Stonehenge would give me an excuse to watch Spinal Tap again. So
good point.
Yeah. And Stonehenge is tall.
Stonehenge would give me an excuse to watch some Doctor Who. Okay, we will come up with another topic about this size of a bite, and we'll get that going, and you guys will see it scheduled real soon. So,
huzzah!
Well, everybody, thanks for being with us tonight, and we will see you on the next episode. Bye, everyone.